Hello, everybody. Welcome to Ways to Human. My name is AJ, and today I'm joined by Eliott Canter to talk about safety at secular conferences. Eliott, welcome. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me on. I'm very excited to chat with you this morning.
Awesome. Same here. So, in the secular community, we pride ourselves bringing like-minded people together, both online and in person. There have been a lot of large events that have taken place over the last few decades, right? As the secular community has grown more. And non religious people are traveling from all over the country to attend these events, be able to shake the hands of their favorite secular content creator or speaker, and to meet new people with very similar interests and with whom they can share their struggles of living religion, for example, or their path towards healing religious trauma. And these events are an extremely important for maintaining these connections and building these friendships. But as any situation that involves human beings, humans are going to human and they're going to make mistakes or they're going to behave in ways that are not ideal or even reprehensible. And I have gathered some questions from our community to ask you. But before we get into those specific questions, I would like to get started with the basics. And so, very briefly, can you share what would you be called? What would be your title at one of these secular conferences or events?
Well, if I go to an event, I would be a consultant. I do this on a volunteer basis. There's no compensation to me for doing it. Um, Something that you had said in the introduction, years ago, I was one of those people that went to that conference for the first time and to go meet a variety of people. As a matter of fact, my partner said to me, listen, we're going to take a ride. Okay, you want to take a ride? And I said, sure. And then 8 hours later, we wound up in Iowa. We went to a convention and got to meet a lot of people that became friends of ours that are friends to this day. So that's how I kind of got into the community, going to those conventions. And then as time went by, we saw that there were issues related to inappropriate conduct, inappropriate behavior. Um, and since I had some background in that from my previous professional experience, I wanted to get involved in trying to help mitigate that in a variety of hygienic ways. So I got involved in a couple of they called them heads meetings back at the time, where the heads of the organizations got together and tried to figure out ways that we could do that. And I found that for me, the way that I contribute the best would be to help write policies and procedures for conventions, codes of conduct, and then train people at those conventions that if they uh, noticed or someone came to them with an issue, to go and investigate that issue to the best extent that we possibly could. So we put in codes of conduct that have evolved over a period of time. We created training, which has evolved over a period of time. And then ultimately, we did investigate issues that came forward when somebody identified a problem or came forward with an issue or someone observed an issue. We investigated that to the best extent we can. From my perspective, and I can't speak for other people that do this, I had an NDA for all the organizations that I work with, a non-disclosure agreement, for the obvious reason. But I'm the only one. If someone came to me with an issue or someone made a complaint, they don't have an NDA. They can say whatever they want, whenever they want. We have, or I had no control over that. And that's, I think, necessary to identify because people have free speech. They can say or choose to say whatever they want. I would ask them that if we're in an investigation to give us the opportunity to at least have the conversation with the people we needed to talk to before they told anyone else. But the only one who had the non-disclosure was me. And I had that with the organizations that I worked with. Secondly, the other agreement I had was that I was going to wind up being autonomous. I was going to wind up pulling the string on an investigation until the very end. And if we found wrongdoing, we were going to take some action. And there was no alternative to that. We were going to take action. And there's a variety of different actions that could be taken. And we can talk about that later, from having a simple conversation with someone to asking them to removing them from the conference.
Right. Yeah.
So, and during the course of our lifetime of doing these things, we've done those. We've asked people to leave. We've sequestered them to their rooms, a variety of different things. What we don't do is we don't call the police unless we absolutely observe something that happened. But otherwise, we don't call the police. We would call for medical assistance if that was necessary, but it would have to be observed or asked for. So there's four walls in terms of limits of what we could or
Right.
couldn't do, and we would live within that. So I would pull the string on an investigation until it was over. No one, no one controlled the investigation but me. I reported directly to the board. I would make recommendations on findings. If there was a finding, what we should do. If there wasn't a finding, then that kind of is its own answer. And you can't always have a finding. Um, but ideally, people never know there's an investigation. They're not supposed to know. Not
Yeah.
from me. Now, if someone, an alleged victim, wants to share their story, they can absolutely do that. They have every right to do that. But me or the board or the organizations, historically, we don't do that. That's what an NDA is for. So you could have 8, 10,
Right.
15 investigations, which at some conventions we did, and no one would ever know, which is
Right.
exactly what's supposed to happen. No one is supposed to know.
Right. Right.
So there's a right
So
of privacy for everybody.
yeah, I have a question though. You mentioned that you had some past experience with security or something like that. What was that experience? If you don't mind sharing.
Yeah, in organizations that I ran, I was responsible for the loss prevention group, either as a direct report to me or a dotted line. So we did hundreds of investigations relative to things that would occur in retail organizations. It could be theft, fraud, misappropriation of funds, a variety of different things. So I did hundreds and hundreds of investigations, or my group did. We were trained. We would go to seminars. We had significant training in how to approach these kind of investigations. So it wasn't seat of your pants stuff. It was formal training that went on for years and years. Same thing with sexual harassment, hostile work environment. The groups were trained, human resource groups were trained in these types of conversations, investigations. So how to talk to someone, how to interview someone, how to interrogate someone. So again, not seat of your pants stuff, not stuff that you go online and Google and then, these are sit down classroom type of events that
Right.
occur
Yeah.
and
Like
that kind of training.
legitimate training. Yeah, that makes
Yeah,
sense.
yeah.
And um, how long have you been doing these conferences? And like, do you focus only on secular conferences, or do you do other types?
Well, in doing loss prevention and sexual harassment, I've been doing that since the late '70s, 1970s. In
Uh,
terms of the conventions themselves, kind of when I semi-retired and really got involved in the secular community. So I've been doing that probably since about 2010, 2011, 2012. So 15 years maybe in our community. And I worked a variety of the conventions. So, and I don't really um, do that as much as I used to. I've kind of walked away from that a little bit. So, because I don't go to the amount of conventions that I used to go to either. So that's
yeah.
probably why. Yeah.
And let's say on the highest year, how many conferences or conventions per year were you doing?
Um, I probably would do somewheres around 6, 7. Probably
It's quite
every
a
other
lot.
month. Yeah, probably every other month. We were going to a bunch of conventions. We found them interesting and exciting. We love seeing our friends. We love seeing the folks in the community, having those conversations. The For me, um, Going to the conventions was exciting because it was educational. I was able to perform a service at the convention while I happened to be there. But like I said, we paid our own way. We went to the conventions generally like everybody else. Okay. Uh, but we wanted to be involved in the community, and different people give in different ways. Some people, want to give money. I want to give time. I thought my time was of more value than just giving money, and I could control that and how
Yeah.
I used that. And I wanted to be the master of how I did that. So, but we went to a variety of different conventions. We went to atheist conventions, agnostic conventions. We actually went to conventions outside of the community altogether. I did some conventions that were health related, food
Mhm.
related, exercise related, and worked those conventions too. So our community is not the only community, obviously, that suffers from this type of issue. So every convention I went to, I offered that service, and generally, it was accepted. So, and again, I wasn't looking for compensation. We weren't
Right.
compensated for. I was going to be at that convention and offered that service. Trained who I had to train, and I should probably talk about what I mean by training.
Okay. Yeah. Sure.
Um,
You can do that.
Training from the first time I went to the conventions evolved very quickly in terms of what I wanted people to know. If I wanted the trainees to be able to identify that if someone came to them, and by trainees I mean the volunteers at the conventions,
Right.
those are the folks that we would train, that if someone came to them because they'd either observed or had been harmed themselves, to initially put them in a safe space, ask if they needed medical attention, ask if they wanted to call the police, and then don't ask any other questions and get me. I'm tr- I've been trained in these investigations, and I didn't want people who weren't trained or who had a half hour or an hour's worth of conversation to start asking questions and get involved in an investigation because they're complicated and ask the wrong question or do the wrong thing or say the wrong thing. So when I am at a convention, I'm available the entire time the convention's there. If it's the middle of the night, I'm available in the middle of the night. If it's first thing in the morning, if it's the middle of the day, no matter what I do or am doing, I get to wherever I'm called immediately. And we've identified safe spaces in each convention where we could take people. And then I, along with witness, would sit down and then have an interview with whoever it was that was necessary for us to talk to, for someone who had an issue, made a complaint, observed something, and then we would start the investigation. And like I said, once it started, the only one who had the ability to stop it was me. I'd pull the string until we were done, and once we were done, I'd make a recommendation. So, and actually, of all the ones I've done, there's only been one time where I made a recommendation where it wasn't taken, and that was its own ball of wax altogether. So, but it happens occasionally.
Yeah.
We have a disagreement, and we worked it out in the end.
Yeah. That's good. Yeah. I mean, I was talking to another member of the community who's also an organizer, Ember. She pointed out that a lot of people wrongly assume that when you're organizing an event, you can just pay a fee to a venue and just throw something together overnight. And I have personally helped organize both indoors and outdoor large events. For example, the March for Science here in Houston, we had about 15,000 people come. It was an outdoor event, obviously, but we had a stage and we had speakers and we had musical guests. We had to be in touch with the police departments in order to do street closings and all of that stuff. So I can corroborate that there is so much that goes into planning a large event. And a lot of organizations have specific event planning committees, including a separate safety committee. And it's one of the most basic requirements of any venue is going to be that you have a safety plan. And very often, these can be non-negotiables. If you don't have one, they're just not even going to accept your money or your offer to host an event there. Um, so it's something that you have to have in writing even before you reach out to a venue to organize something. Has that been your experience to where these conventions, do they always have a safety plan?
Um, well, it's an interesting question because when you go into a venue, we have absolutely, we're guests. The venue is the one who really owns the processes, and you offer a service within the confines of your convention, but you have to live within the four walls of the rules of the space that you go to because it belongs to them. And we can talk about Vegas because so many happen there. So historically, what happens if we have a convention at a hotel, I go and interface and see if I can meet with their director of security and say and introduce myself to them and typically to the manager of the hotel and say we're having the event here. I'm responsible for this piece of the venue. Tell me what you want to hear from me. And I'd like for us to meet every day. If your security is aware of something that happened or you want us involved, I'll do that. If I hear something, I'll let you know. But they really set the rules. So if we have a convention in any hotel, we're limited to the rules that the hotel allows us to operate in. So we can go and create a code of conduct, which we do, which we show to the hotel, and let them know we have people that are going to be involved in trying to create a safe space for that. Within the confines of the rules, the hotel allows us to do that. So if we have a issue, we communicate that with the hotel because it's still their space. And we need to have some conversation with them to how to know that they potentially have other guests that are at risk. We are still in their venue. Okay. We don't have access. If they have cameras, we don't have access to those cameras. But we can ask if there's an event or an issue, can we view the videos? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. It all depends on the relationship that you have. We had one convention that I worked at, we had the same year, every year at the same time, and I got to be really friendly with the person who was the director of security. I had coffee with him every morning. We got to be friends, actually. They were extraordinarily cooperative. Anytime we had an issue, anything that came up, we had their resources available to us to use. But having said that, there's still some pretty significant limits to what that means. So let me give some real life examples of what
Okay.
that means. No one has an obligation to talk to us. It's not like we're at work. If we're at work and something happens, generally you have an obligation to talk if your employer starts an investigation. But if you're a visitor at a conference and I want to talk to someone who may or may not have been involved or observed something, they have no obligation to talk to me, and I can't do anything about that. I can't make them. So everything really is self-reflective in terms of how that works. Same thing with the convention. We had an issue at one convention where someone came to us and said that in real time they were threatened. Okay,
Wow.
physically threatened. When that happened, I felt that we had an obligation to go to the hotel and tell them someone has come to us and told us they're being threatened. The hotel made a decision that they were going to keep an eye on that person, rightfully, because if I've told them and they get hurt and they didn't do anything about it, they're liable in some sense.
Right.
So they have their cameras, and this happened to be in Las Vegas, and they kept an eye. Now, people feel they're getting spied on. It's not being spied on in that sense. It's being careful that someone made a threat and the hotel is ensuring the safety, not just of them, but of all their other guests. So they have a much broader context that they view it in. For us, we're myopic. We're interested in the people at our convention. For the hotel we're in, we're their guests. There's us and maybe a couple thousand other people. So it's not just that we're the only ones there. We feel we are. We feel special, but we're not. We're just more bodies in a big building. So we have to interface. We do interface with the people that are responsible with the venue that we're in. We try and be good partners with them to ensure that they know what's going on in their own space. We had an incident at one of the conventions where the director of loss prevention came to me and said uh, that someone was throwing stuff off the balcony, which and their room was on the 12th floor.
Huh.
Would I go up there and manage that and do something about that? And I said, sure. So, and as I was going to do that, the police came and they managed it. But we'll do the thing, whatever we have to do to try and maintain whatever decorum is necessary. So we wear a lot of hats when we do this, but the biggest hat that I think that we have on is to create an environment of a safe space so that people can go and have a good time. Different conventions and different people have an opinion about what is a good time. In some
Right.
conventions, they have alcohol, and probably in some conventions, they don't. And, and in some conventions, there's a concern about um, people and how they interact. And they code how people interact. Sometimes if they have and I'm kind of just generalizing, but if they have a red dot on their name tag, they
Mhm.
don't want to be interacted with at all. A yellow dot, they want to initiate contact. A green dot, contact completely. Some conventions do that. Some conventions don't. Okay. And that's the rules of the road for each convention. You expect that people will honor those things. Some conventions don't have anything like that at all. They don't want
Right.
to.
Right.
Some conventions say, we're not going to control how much liquor you drink. You're an adult. You're responsible for yourself. Some want to try and control that. It's literally impossible, I think. Okay.
Makes
Generally,
sense.
conventions are to go for people to go and enjoy themselves and have a good time within limits. But the people that go to our conventions are part of the general demographic and population of the country. Some people do stupid stuff. You don't have to be an atheist, an agnostic, a humanist to do something
Human.
stupid. People
You
do
just gotta
stupid
be a
stuff.
human. That's the only requirement.
And when they do it, if they do something that's untoward and it comes to us, we try and create a remedy. Are we perfect? Yeah, I'm human too. I mean, we do an investigation as good as we can. And once we do, we try and come up with a remedy for that if we find a solution. But you can't always find a solution.
Yeah.
So another component of this is, let's say hypothetically, because I hear this as a conversation a lot. If we ask somebody to leave a convention
Mhm.
because their behavior was inappropriate, I can't tell anybody that. I have a
Right.
non-disclosure agreement. The board, if that's who I report to, can tell anybody they want, but I can't. And they probably won't, because then you enter into a level of liability potentially that becomes extremely problematic. So, and if somebody exhibited bad behavior once, will they exhibit it again? Man, maybe, you know. And there's a group right now that's out there that's trying to address that. And we tried to do something like this actually 15 years ago, where we wanted to compile a list of people that exhibited bad behavior at conventions. And attorneys, okay, as
Mhm.
we went through this process, were really concerned about the level of liability that could possibly and potentially be incurred if you shared that information inappropriately. So it's a concern. The thing that I found mitigated it the most, if someone went to one convention and then was at another convention and I was there, was they knew I was there. So my attendance was prophylactic in terms of, or hygienic in terms of them exhibiting better behavior maybe than they did before. I'd walk up and say, "Hey, how you doing?" and just smile,
I
and
remember you.
without saying that. but
Yeah, yeah,
I'm here.
right.
So, and what I found was, is I went to the same conventions over and over again annually. The instances where people would talk to us increased, but the severity significantly decreased.
That's good.
Ultimately, conversations even stopped because people knew we were there and their behavior improved. At least that was my observation. So,
Okay, there was again. I think I don't know if it's like the connection, but you were talking about how the severity decreased, and I think it cut off right there.
okay. When we went to the same conventions annually, we found the severity of issues decreased. Even though conversations may have increased, more people were comfortable talking to us, but they were talking about us with issues that were not, I don't want to diminish anything, but issues that were less severe.
Hmm.
Okay, but we're having more conversations. And then ultimately, even those conversations started to diminish because the issues started to evaporate. So being there became hygienic in the sense that people were on their best behavior. They were more aware. And I was having the conversation when the conventions first start. I get up and do 5 or 10 minutes and talk about I'm here. If something happens, we'll investigate it. So people knew we were there. They saw the code of conduct. They had to sign off on the code of conduct. They were aware of the code of conduct. And they were also aware that somebody was there who was going to wind up holding people accountable if they violated the code of conduct. So those are all important issues, I think, relative to do that. And I think more and more conventions had somebody like me doing that, where other people got involved in writing codes of conduct, executing codes of conduct. And I think there are people out there now that do that more than I do, or more than I did, because I just don't do it like I used to.
Yeah, sorry about that. We had some technical issues. So I was saying that I can confirm what you were just talking about regarding the code of conduct being displayed pretty much everywhere. Last year, I was at NanoCon, and I remember getting an email because I was both a volunteer and a speaker. And this email included the written code of conduct, and then there was a link to the website. When I arrived at the event, that same code of conduct was displayed on a really big board next to the conference rooms where the stage was. And once you went and did your registration to get your name tag and everything, you had to read it and sign it again. And on top of that, before all the speakers began to talk, you yourself, Eliott, gave your speech. You gave people instructions on how to seek help if they had any concerns or incidents, or they felt uncomfortable at all, and at any kind of level, whether it was a major, incident, or whether it was just, hey, this person's making me feel a little awkward. You were instructed to find somebody with the yellow lanyards, which were the volunteers who are trained on how to proceed with this sort of report. You yourself wrote these codes of conduct, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, that's good. So if we were to go to, say, a different conference, but a secular conference, I should expect to sort of see the same type of codes of conduct and the same methods of delivery of the code of conduct. Okay, that's good to know. Um,
Essentially, yeah, you're going to find that they're plagiarized from each other, which is really great, because
yeah,
you find something in one convention that you may not have, or you cut and paste something that you wrote, or has been improved from 10 years ago. The whole idea is it doesn't matter who wrote it. It only matters that it appears and that it's encompassing of what the behavior expectation is and what's out of bounds. So, and then once you have that on the website, to ensure that everybody sees it. That's why we had the sign off when people walked in. That's why we had the bulletin board there. And that's why I get up in front and start the convention that way, so that everybody knows the rules of the road. And then if, you know, somebody violates the rules of the road, that there's going to wind up being a consequence of some sort. Now, the consequence may not be anything more than a conversation, or it might wind up being the expulsion from the convention. That's up to the board of whoever drives that convention. And like I said, if I do an investigation, um, I find what I find, and then I present the findings to the board. But the board has the ultimate decision about what the behavior is, historically based on my recommendation. I said that 99 times out of 100, they'll take my recommendation. Occasionally, a time that didn't happen, but it didn't have anything to do, actually, to qualify that. It wasn't about a convention. It was about a separate incident I was asked to come in and look at, independent of a convention. It was an issue that was really different. Okay. And the board made a decision that they wanted to act in a way that I thought was not great. And I said what I had to say and had some conversations, and so I can't give a lot of information about that, and I won't. But it was disappointing, to say the least. So, but
Yeah,
that's
for
the only
sure.
time I've been frustrated like that, which has been really limited. So that was pretty good.
Yeah, that's good to hear that most of them are, following all of these suggestions, and from somebody who has a lot more experience. So I had a specific question from a community member that was wondering whether the codes of conduct outline explicitly what harassment or violations of consent and such are. And I wanted to show on screen real quick what, for example, NanoCon. This was the code of conduct from NanoCon, and it specifically says NanoCon does not tolerate harassment of or by convention participates in any form. Prohibited conduct includes, but is not limited to, harassment related to gender, gender identity, sexual orientation, disability, physical appearance, body size, race, age, religion, sexual images in public spaces not related to convention sessions or materials, deliberate intimidation, stalking, harassing photography or recording, sustained disruption of talks or other events, inappropriate physical contact, and unwelcome sexual attention. So those are some of the examples. And if you look at American Atheists, is pretty much exactly the same wording um, throughout all of the code of conduct, the same expectations. They also add, however, a little bit extra, saying that this is a family-friendly event and LGBTQ plus friendly event. So those are things that individual conventions could add to the main body of what your code of conduct is that you have written in the past and that you provide to each individual, and then they add whatever else they want to it. So I just wanted to show that these are across the board pretty much the same, that people have the same expectations. And speaking of expectations, I was wondering whether high profile speakers or organizers, volunteers, content creators, are they held to the same standards as the average attendee that comes just to watch?
Fair question. But I'm going to answer that in a generic way again, because I have limitations on how I can talk about some of these things. But I can tell you, in the years that I've done this, um, we've had um, executives from boards that have been relieved of their duties because of investigations that I've been involved in. We've had people that are part of organizations, executive directors, directors that have been, or folks that work within organizations that have been relieved of their responsibilities, speakers that have been asked to leave, people involved in a variety of parts of organizations that have been asked to leave or terminated from the organizations because of investigations. No one's immune. There is no get out of jail free card. If your behavior is bad, and it comes forward and we get to do an investigation and we have a finding, then historically the organizations have really done the right thing in terms of uh, consequence, okay? Irrespective of position, all right? Doesn't happen a lot where it's a senior, but when it does, the organizations have done the right thing. At least that's been my experience. I can't talk about investigations I haven't
Yeah.
been involved in. No one is immune. No one has a get out of jail free card. Um, Having said that, nobody in the community is going to hear about it. Nobody's going to be told about it unless somebody really talks out of school. They're not supposed to. When an investigation happens, it's not flown up the flagpole, put out on YouTube, you know, put on Facebook generally. Okay. So occasionally something that happens, an investigation will get out there. Somebody, for whatever reason, um, will wind up getting involved in and wanting to get the information out to the public. There's been instances where blog. I remember several years ago, a really significant blogger in the community put out a story about something that happened because they were unhappy with the result of the investigation because there was no findings and felt that there was uh, a threat to the community. So without concrete evidence, they put out information, and this is years ago, that got hundreds and hundreds of comments. Okay, and somebody got dragged pretty good without any real concrete information that related to um, wrongdoing. Now, people take sides. Some people say this is more than enough. Some people say this is not nearly enough. And everybody's entitled to their own opinion. They're not entitled to their own facts. And they're not entitled to wind up dragging people where there's not a preponderance of evidence that shows that there's an issue. And one of the things that's necessary relative to all these things, I think, is where's the legal basis? So if you do an investigation and you talk about under the pains and penalty of perjury, okay, it's different than just writing down something on Facebook, okay, because then there's a legal consequence. Um, we do investigations. People occasionally hear about them. They think more should be done. They want to publicize it. They want it out in the open. They think a wrong occurred. If I can't prove it, because after I've talked to witnesses and I've talked to the victim, and this alleged occurrence can't be proven because it's they said against they said, I can't do anything about that. I'm not going to put it out. I can't publicize it. I'm not going to react to it, other than the fact I'm going to have a generic conversation like this. People have strong opinions, okay, where they think that something may or may not have occurred. And I've seen it happen several times. I've seen on Facebook, and again, this is something that I've experienced years ago. Someone was accused of something. People came forward, polarized the community. I happened to wind up seeing the investigation that occurred from the event space where it happened on cameras, where what people thought happened didn't. And I can't talk about it. I couldn't say anything about it. It's harmful.
Yeah.
So, but emotions run deep. People want folks protected, understandably, absolutely understandably. But you can't just go make wild assertions because I shouldn't say wild assertions, assertions in general, especially if you're really, it's someone, you're close to. We want to get to the truth, but you can't just go ahead and will the truth to happen. If you can't conclusively prove that an issue occurred, then you go as far as you can, and that really is the end of the investigation. We don't always get the result we want. I would say historically, they're real tough to wind up getting to a finality where you can conclusively prove. Sometimes you can get a confession. Sometimes we have other things that we can find. Sometimes we have eyewitnesses that can that can do it. Sometimes we can get a videotape. Sometimes, but not all the times, and probably less often than not. Um, and emotions run deep. Large conversations get held about this. People take sides. We start,
Yeah,
but
especially when it comes to like what they call the court of public opinions, right? And somebody hears a specific word being thrown out there, as far as to what happened in a certain incident, and they immediately respond with this very, very emotional hope that they can help lessen that harm, and ultimately it ends up causing a whole lot more harm for more than just one person, for everybody that's just even a bystander. So I think that's a really big problem, and the reason why we don't hear about these things is because, like you say, they're being handled properly through the appropriate channels, through the appropriate investigations. Sometimes they may, as far as having a separate investigation that is not. So it's like it's really complicated. I was gonna ask you, like, there's this woman in the community who's also a speaker at some events, and she shared with me that one of these secular conferences, she walked in and this man approached her, and he was being very aggressive in an attempt at kind of becoming close to her, sort of physical. And I believe they were not in a very visible space where there were too many people around. So this man attempted to kiss her and like touch her a little bit, and she this happened a couple years ago to her. But I have also certainly heard of cases where it was the opposite. I know that these incidents are much more common against women, but I've also heard of men being aggressively approached by women. How common would you say these type of incidents are at secular conferences? Not just sexual harassment, but like any type of incident.
I think that there's generally, and I use generally. So if you have about 500 people at a conference, you're going to wind up having, you're absolutely going to wind up having about 10 events that are going to occur of some level of severity, inappropriate behavior in dirty jokes, inappropriate touching, instances like you just talked about. But out of those 10, one is going to be significant. Particularly if alcohol is available, the only question is not that they're going to occur. Are you going to hear about it? And that happens pretty regularly. So in the conventions that we work, we hope to hear about it so that we can do something about it when it happens. But they're tough. It's tough to come forward. People are reluctant to come forward and talk about these issues for a variety of reasons. And we don't and won't ever shame anybody. It's tough to come forward and have that conversation. But those events at every single convention happen.
Yeah,
Absolutely, they happen. The only question really is, are you going to hear about it so that you can react to it? And they happen because people are human. They do stupid stuff all the time. And particularly if they have a little alcohol or they get a little high or whatever their herb, drug, or fluid of choice is, and they're away from home, so they're less inhibited potentially, and they're having a good time. And I'm not going to make excuses. They don't recognize their behavior gets reckless or inappropriate, but it does. And you don't know if you're going to wind up insulting somebody by saying something untoward. It may not be insulting to you, but it may be insulting to them. And like I said, there's levels. Some may just be an unkind word or a silly comment that they find offensive. Some might be significantly more severe, but they happen. They absolutely occur. That's been my experience in the conventions that I've gone to, and in both
Yeah,
professional and I guess these are more social settings. So, because
right.
I've seen them happen, I've investigated them at professional settings where the same stuff happens. So, except in a professional setting, they have to sit and talk to me. The conversations
Sure.
are way different. They are not getting they're not really interviews, they're interrogations, and they're
Mhm.
not comfortable for the people that we talk to, and the outcomes are
Sure.
dramatic, can be dramatically different, because now we're talking about people's livelihood, where they can wind up being excused from the company and they wind up unemployed. So,
Very true.
and that stuff occurs more than you think.
Yeah. So you covered earlier how, how the process is to reporting these incidents, and how the volunteers are trained. So my question now is more like, what happens if you finish your investigation and there is something that, do you sometimes have to report to the police, or how do you decide whether to do that? Like, does the victim have any say in that process?
The victim, the alleged victim, to a great extent controls the investigation. We, in a sense, really represent them. I can't call the police unless I observe something. Now, the victim can certainly call the police, and generally we have that conversation with them. Say, do you want to call the police? Do you want police involved, or do you need medical attention? And I ask that. I'm more concerned for their well-being than anything. Everything else is second to that. But if they choose not to call the police, I can't. I don't, unless I saw something. So I hear, people say, why don't you call the police? Why don't you call the police? Well, why don't you call the police? Okay.
Mhm.
So I don't call them because I'm not supposed to. Now,
Right.
if you're smarter than me and you think you need to call the police about something, go call them. Okay. Because you heard about something, or you think something happened, or somebody told you something, call them. Give them your name, call them, do what you think you have to do. My experience is not that. The victim, the alleged victim, controls our conversation. If they don't want to call the police, that's the beginning and the end of it. If they don't want medical attention, even if we think it's in their best interest, they control that. They also control, in a lot of ways, the limits that I can go to once I do an investigation. If they told me they just wanted to give me a statement just so I had it, okay,
Hmm.
and have that conversation, and they don't want me to go further, I'm generally done. I don't go beyond what their request is. Even if somebody else thinks that I should go further, they don't really get a vote. The only one who really gets a vote is the person who gave us the conversation. And a lot of times they qualify what they say to me as, I want to share a story. I don't want it to go further than this. So now I have that information. And down the road, there may be a way that I can react to that in some way. But if they tell me they don't want me to talk to anybody, I'm done. And when they tell me that unequivocally, I'm finished. Now, I tell the board, I tell the people I report to, when I sit with a witness, I record those conversations.
Yeah.
Sometimes I have written statements in addition to the recording, but it's their story. It's not my story. It's their request. It's their decision. I'm a facilitator of helping to get to the truth.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's what I try and do, but they have a lot of influence, the alleged victims, on what I can and can't do. And that really is the beginning and end of it. If they come to me and they tell me don't go further and I go ahead and do more, that's problematic. That's it. And I'll tell you something else that occurs from that. That can get around, and then all of a sudden, if that gets around, that a victim came to us, an alleged victim came to us and with a story, and then we didn't accede to their wishes, other people aren't going to come. They're not going to share.
Right.
Conversely, if somebody comes to us, wants us to do a full investigation, and then that investigation happens the way that, in a professional manner, the way that it should, and there's a outcome. I've had people go on their own YouTube channel and talk about the investigations that we did, and those help other investigations because not they had a terrible event happen to them, but the experience of going through the investigation was cathartic and helped them
Hmm.
get through the other side and say to other folks, when you go through this, there is a solution. There is an opportunity for further conversation. So when I hear people that have no background or understanding of about what can and can't occur, what should or shouldn't happen, easy. You don't have any responsibility. You can say what you want. You can wish for what you want to wish for, but it doesn't work that way. There are parameters that you have to operate in. You may not get the outcome you want. Okay, but we have guidelines and we have perspective about and respect for the people that come to us and share a story, and they tell us what they tell us. Fact witnesses are people that had an experience or firsthand saw an experience. And those are the people that we generally talk to. Someone that kind of heard something about this, or maybe thought they heard something about that, or this kind of maybe happened there, or why don't you believe me? Why don't you believe this? Or what? I don't disbelieve it, but if you didn't see it, you really don't have anything to tell me.
Right.
So if you didn't experience it, otherwise it's just you heard something. It doesn't matter who you heard it from, you heard it. You didn't see it. And if I see it, if you saw it, if you witnessed it, I want to hear about it. But if somebody told you about it, okay, I appreciate you telling me, but I can't go anywhere with that. You didn't experience it. You weren't a firsthand witness to it. It's hearsay. And, you know, we're not a court of law, but we're governed by the same kind of paradigm that
Right.
in terms of
And
investigations.
yeah, and I think that there is a like you shared, that somebody had shared her experience on YouTube of what happened to her, and that this helped other people. And I think that that's key right there, because there are positive and negative ways of making these sort of things public. When it is the victim herself or themselves sharing this in a way that ultimately leads to a positive outcome for others, then that's a good thing. But when you have people sharing it, like you say, from hearsay, from word of mouth as a rumor, that can be a negative thing. We have to make sure that people share these things responsibly, respectfully, in a positive way that centers the victim and not make a chaotic thing out of it that can further harm the alleged victim. And what you mentioned about you not being able to call the police is also in line with what organizations like RAIN, which is an organization that deals with abuse, like sexual abuse victims, and helps give them support. Autonomy is key for someone who has just gone through, for example, a sexual assault. So being able to give the person the ability to choose how to move forward with the investigation, with how far they want to go with it, with what they want done or not done, that is so important in supporting the victim themselves. So I think that's a great process of what you do. Yeah.
And don't forget, this is again, it's so different than if you work in an organization. I can't make anybody do anything. I don't have any influence relative to that. Nobody has to talk to me ever. Even if a fact witness, a victim, if a victim, an alleged victim tells me something, and I go and talk to a witness, an eyewitness, someone who really has perspective, they don't have to talk to me. They can say, I don't want to get involved. And people do that. And I don't try and shame them into the fact, well, this could, you observe something and this could help and protect other people. But that's not a fair conversation. People have their own reasons for getting involved or not getting involved, and it's not up to me to judge them for those reasons. If they had an observation about something that occurred, I'd like them to share it with me. If they choose not to, that's their choice. I'm not going to make them feel bad about that or even try to or attempt to. I want to try and get to the truth. That's all I want to do. I want to try and get to a solution. And I want to get to the solution that the alleged victim told me that they want. Because one of the last things I asked is, what is it you want the outcome to be of this? They, the alleged victim is the one who guides these investigations. I'm a tool to help them get some satisfaction, some answer out of what happened. But if they say, I don't want an answer, okay. Now, if people come to me because they observe something and want to share, I'll listen to that. If they observed it with their own eyes, if they saw it or heard it firsthand. But because somebody said something to somebody else and said something, yeah, no. So
Right, right. Like sometimes a victim's sort of advocate will come to you and say, "Hey, this happened to this person," and then you that can lead
people
to
people have their own motives for why they do what they do. Okay. Sometimes in it's been in my experience in these kind of things. And I told you earlier, I've seen where these get a life of their own, where people wind up getting involved that don't have any firsthand experience in this, and it explodes on the internet, and all these things occur, and people take sides, and it's not healthy. So if you saw it, I'm there for you. I want to know. If you didn't have a firsthand recollection of it or knowledge of it, probably not. Okay, there's exceptions to every rule, but in the main, we look for clear witnesses about who observed something so we could get something. But these can take on a life of their own. People become passionate about something that they care about. Everybody cares about, I think, this issue. I like to think that I'm involved in this because I want to get a solution for somebody. I've heard that I protect the organizations. No, I don't. I don't protect anybody. Believe me, I don't protect anybody. If somebody did something wrong, I am the wrong guy they want to see coming to them. I don't protect a soul, okay? Ever. I'm not protecting an organization. I'm not protecting a person. I'm not protecting anybody. I'm getting to the truth if I can, and the truth is what the truth is, and that's the beginning and the end of the story. And that's why I don't get compensated.
right.
Nobody can point a finger, okay? I'm in it to find out what happened. That's it. And that's the only thing that has to do with anything. So we're not protecting a soul. If you did something wrong and I can address that,
That's probably the best way to approach it because you can be given a claim, but until you find out the facts or the evidence, then you're not going to have much to do with just a claim.
it's what once a claim comes, it's what the alleged victim wants me to do with the claim. If they just want me to hear it and document it and not go forward, then that's what I do, and that's really the end of it for me.
Yeah,
So now, can other things occur down the road that will change that scenario? Absolutely, and they do. People change their minds. Other evidence comes forward. Somebody made an observation about something or saw something firsthand that could change that. So it's always fluid. But there's another piece to this. I work at a convention. So, and a convention lasts a couple days. So if something happens 6 months after the convention or 7 months after the convention and somebody comes to me, I'll listen to the story and I'll take a statement, but there's a statute of limitations on all this stuff. Now, that's the legal requirement, and it's 6 months. So all this stuff is governed by the 1964 Civil Rights Act, it's Title VII, and there's real clear specifics about what happens, but it's generally in the workplace, but not exclusively. There's real definable rules about in terms of what is and what isn't sexual harassment relative to the law. Okay, and then the policies that are generated by the different organizations. So we work within the confines of that. But if months later somebody comes to me with something, an incident that wasn't reported at the time, that's tough to investigate. Uh, how am I going to do that? Okay, and I'm not really, the whole idea of somebody like me at a convention is to keep the convention at the time safe if
right.
something is happening then and there in real time. But months later, I mean, and I've had people come to me months later, and we've taken statements, and I try to go back and investigate it as good as I can. But it's relative at that point. What am I going to do? Okay, I mean, I could look at something, I can talk to people if they'll talk to me, but I'm not really in the capacity that I was and am. It's difficult to go back after some period of time and go back and look at things. Now, there's an organization now that's trying things a little bit differently that I think is has a good basis and a future in the community for what they're trying to do. The creator content group, and they're doing some things, and I've got high hopes for them. I think that they're really going to help the community down the road.
Yeah, I've
We'll
heard great things about them. Yeah, I have been wanting to get accredited by them. It's the Creators Accountability Network, I believe it's
Yeah,
called. Yeah,
and I talked to their executive director a couple times about their process and what they're doing, and I think that down the road they're even now shouldn't say down the road they're going to play a big part in helping to keep the community safe. So I'm an advocate for what they're doing
that's good.
in terms of that. So I'm hoping for their success.
Yeah, me too. Same, same. I've seen other content creators praise them pretty highly for what they're doing. So I hope that they succeed on that. Speaking of the process of reporting and going to the police and all of that, if some of the events are family friendly. For example, when I went to NanoCon, I took my teenager with me, who was 14 at the time. So, if let's say there was a hypothetical incident with my teenager, and I came to you, or even my teenager came directly to you or to a volunteer and reported something, being a minor, the rules different.
Depending on the age of the minor, I tell you to go to the district attorney and not get involved. I historically don't get involved with anything that has to do with minors. It's a whole different set of rules and circumstances. And the couple where people have come to me and told me about some things, I've generally referred them, depending on the case, either to go to their local district attorney and law enforcement or to go to the FBI, depending on what the issue was. And I won't get involved
That's good.
even, I don't want to see anything. I don't want to hear anything because I'm not qualified and I don't manage in that space. So I don't get involved in something like that.
Yeah. No, that's good to know because I feel like people need to know what to expect in those cases, but also it's good that you're not going beyond what you understand your abilities to be. So I think that helps people feel a lot safer with actually going to you for help, even if it was a minor, and being like, hey, can you help me contact or can you keep them in a safe place while we contact the police or stuff like that, right? And if somebody was involved in an incident, if an adult was involved in an incident as the aggressor, what is the policy? Do you allow them back to the same conference, or is it like a case by case situation here?
Well, I think it would depend on what they did.
Yeah,
And it's not up to me, it would be up to the board. And the board would make a decision if they wanted to have that person back again. I've been to conferences where we ask people to leave, and historically they've done a couple different things. At one time they said you may never come back. Okay, you're not invited ever again. In one instance, it was egregious enough to ask them to leave, but it wasn't egregious enough in the board's perspective that they couldn't come back. So they told them they couldn't come back for 2 years and they would be welcome back after that. And then I don't know if they came back or not after that, but it really is up to the board what they ultimately decide to do. My perspective about that is if we've asked somebody to leave because they've had some egregious behavior, why ever take a chance to bring them back? There's an old saying, something like past performance identifies future behavior. So if we've seen someone act badly, why take the chance and jeopardize the community again? But not all. And again, it's determinative based on the level of it. But if you're asking somebody to leave, okay, instead of kind of sequestered to their room, it's pretty egregious.
that makes sense. And also, it also depends on whether, if you did an investigation and determined that this person didn't do what they were accused of doing, or they did do what they were accused of doing, then that will also um, weigh on whether they will be invited back or not. I had another comment from a community member that was asking whether having a hallway monitor type of staff member would be useful or not. Like my personal opinion is that it shouldn't be a thing, because we're not like a prison courtyard, right? And we have to consider that the fact that these conferences sometimes are hosted at hotels, resorts, conference organizers generally have like a full schedule of events, including things after the speaking engagements, to make sure that people have downtime, that they have the opportunity to mingle and get to know each other in a more laid back setting. But at the same time, you have people that choose to not take part in these half official after speaking engagement events, right? And so I don't know if we can expect these safety policies to be applied to things like parties or drinking in the hotel bar or unofficial meetups that are not necessarily part of the whole conference, right? And so where does the conference responsibility and personal responsibility start? What do you think?
I don't think any place different than in typical social settings. So let's talk about a convention in general, or ones that I've been involved in. Historically, people go to conventions to learn, interact with other people, have a good time. And again, the thing we've talked about for the past hour or so has been creating a safe space so people can do that. Some people that go to these events are socially awkward and create, I want to say, an issue because what they mean to say doesn't always come out the way they mean it. They don't mean to be offensive, but sometimes they are to someone, or someone may take offense to something that they say. It's almost impossible to monitor against that. People have the right to be offended. Okay. Now, you don't have the right to have inappropriate behavior towards people, but you have the right to say what you want to say within confines. Is it the convention's responsibility to put monitors in? Not the conventions I want to go to. Okay. I'm going to go and I'm going to interact and have a good time with, because I'm going to go to those conventions with an expectation that's what's going to happen. Now, do conventions have to limit that interaction? I talked earlier about the red, yellow, and green dots that people wear, talk to me, don't talk. Some conventions want to do that. Okay. They want to protect that kind of level of conversation or intimacy. So they don't want people to feel uncomfortable. But other people feel uncomfortable now because they're limited to who they should or can talk to and how they can talk to them. I would say to you, different conventions offer different things to different people. You find a convention that you want to go to that offers the level of intimacy that you're comfortable with, and those are the ones you go to. And if a convention doesn't offer that, you can make the recommendation that the convention may or may not, accede to. And if you feel you're going to be uncomfortable, don't go. But if you're asking a convention to bend because you're uncomfortable about the way you interact, that's probably not the convention for you. It's not the convention's. The convention's responsibility is to have a safe space for you to go
Yeah.
to and interact, but not to monitor people's behavior in the sense that they're going to have people watching what other folks are saying or doing. I don't think that that's doable, first of all. But some conventions try that, and my hat's off to them. Okay, and for some people, those are conventions that people that are uncomfortable in social settings should go to. But not all conventions are. And I'll use, the convention that you went to in Nashville. That convention is a convention to interact with a lot of people. The whole point of that convention was always get as many different speakers, as many different people, as many different personalities representing as many different points of view as we could get, and put them in a space and let people interact and have a good time and have a lot of conversations about atheism, agnosticism, mysticism, whatever your favorite topic is, and have conversations, meet people, make friends. And that's why NanaCon is one of the largest conventions in the Southeast, because that's the nature of that convention. And that was always it. The speakers are approachable. Everybody was supposed to be approachable. Everybody was supposed to be able to have conversations, and they do, and they have. And that's why it's grown the way that it has. Not every convention's like that. Probably tougher back in the day to talk to some people than it was, to others, but life's changed. So anyway, long story short is I don't think we can monitor people's behavior. Okay.
Right.
I wouldn't want to go to a convention that did. We're part of the general demographic. Some people are going to do stupid stuff. Some people are not. We try and create an environment that's safe for everybody and respectful, and that's why we write the code of conduct, have people sign off. I do that little couple minutes in the beginning. Other conventions do something extremely similar to what I'm talking about. And these have been in place in the conventions I went to for years. These are not new. I've been doing this for, like I said, 12, 14 years. I did it at a lot of conventions. It was always the first thing I did. I didn't get to every convention, but a lot of conventions I went to.
I agree. I mean, I think what you just mentioned is exactly what the community, what individuals can do when they attend a convention. Be more aware, be more responsible, read, sign, and follow the code of conduct. I think that's the most basic thing that one can do. If you're somebody that doesn't drink, then and you feel like you can safely be around those who are drinking, if you're with your friends, right, with a group of friends, and you see that they're drinking and you want to hang out with them and keep an eye on them, that's cool. That's something that friends do for friends, but it's not something that is sort of required, or that that you have to have a sober person, kind of like the way you will have a sober driver, right? Like that's a different situation. But do keep your eyes open. Look for a volunteer if you need assistance getting somebody to help. And if you go to a volunteer and that volunteer, let's say, is a woman and she doesn't feel comfortable approaching a man that seems to be aggressive, then you can be like, hey, go find somebody that you will feel more comfortable approaching this specific person for this specific incident or whatever is happening. Are there
Now,
any other tips you will have for people?
well, I guess one of the things you could do, and I haven't really seen this, but I've had thoughts about this lately, is look, we had just talked about people are going to go and have a good time and party, and some people overindulge occasionally, and some people way overindulge. And I think if we see people in a convention that are way overindulging, I don't think there's anything irresponsible with people that are volunteers in the convention or board or people that are holding the convention to go over to those people and go, time to go to sleep, time to leave the venue, time to leave the venue, because it's in their best interest. Okay, and it's in the organization's best interest to monitor that. If it's seen or somebody says, look, this person is really out of sorts, we need to do something. Whether so then it's free will. What is our for what can and can't we do? And again, at that point, when you really eat at the bar per se, even though the convention is there, it's really the venue at that point. It's not really the convention. Or when a
Mm,
convention occurs, it occurs when there's speakers that are happening or a dinner but after that, it's not really the convention anymore. It's a separate entity. But if we see somebody that's kind of struggling with their sobriety, shall we say, or they're in their cups, maybe it's time to say, it's probably in everybody's best interest for you to go
yeah,
to sleep for at least a little while, or to leave and go relax and avoid a issue. I don't think that there's anything problematic with that. I think that that's hygienic for everybody,
yeah.
and saying, yeah, we eliminate a potential opportunity for bad behavior.
Right.
So
And at that point, you can tell where the person is. There's people that drink quite a bit and they can still, handle themselves and not be a nuisance to others. But then you have people who may drink a little bit more and get a lot more rowdy and cause disruption. And that's when you want to draw the line and be like, hey, your own friends can do that and be like, hey, let's go take a nap, do
and,
something.
and one of the things on the code of conduct is that essentially says is we're the arbiter, the convention's the arbiter. We're going to make a decision about your behavior in a sense. So if we're asking you to do this, we're really not asking you. We're kind of telling you if you want to participate in the remainder of the event and not be asked to leave, it's time for you to go back to your room. I don't think I've ever seen that exercise, but it may be time to think about that, to
Yeah.
be proactive, to prevent some. Then you create this sense of you're an arbiter of people's behavior, but maybe we've come to the time where we have to be a little bit, where if we see somebody that's really in a way that they're not controlling themselves in a way they should, we should intervene. to some extent, get them some coffee, get them sobered up a little bit, whatever it takes, and then allow them to participate again. But it's in everybody's best interest to be
Yeah.
proactive in that, I think.
And I think their reaction says a lot. If they're like willing to, oh, hey, you know what? I'll go and have some coffee. That's cool. But if they fight back, then you have more like the ability to say, hey, okay, we are going to ask you to leave, actually leave, and not just give you the opportunity to cool off and calm down. All of this conversation that we've had may seem a little bit concerning to some people, like somebody who's new to the community and has never been to one of these events and maybe worry like, well, why are they talking about this safety thing? I want this to be like an educational thing. So if there's anybody listening that is new to the community or for future people of the community, what would you like them to know as far as like, hey, these are safe spaces, like we got your back, or anything you want to say about that?
We are where we are with this because we heard a lot of people who wanted something like this so that we could create a safer space for them. Conventions have been going on for quite some time, and more, there were issues relative to inappropriate behavior that weren't getting addressed in a way that was making people comfortable. The people that ran the organizations heard those conversations. They heard those people's concerns. And slowly but surely, maybe not as fast as some wanted, have created these processes, these policies to be put in place to create safer spaces and safe spaces. Are they perfect? Well, perfect is relative, but we're
Mhm.
getting so much better. We have policies. I think every general organization that has a some kind of gathering has some policy now in place. Okay, a lot of people did a lot of work to make that happen. A lot of people created a lot of effort to make that happen, and I think that their efforts have been rewarded. Okay, now you can talk about why they did it. People have a variety of motives. It doesn't matter. What matters is that we do have these policies in place. We have volunteers that are available to be trained. The organizations have heard in terms of how they handle these type of issues when they're brought forward. It's a little harder outside of an organized convention to be able to navigate through these, but within the confines of a organization that has a convention, I think you'll find that there's a pretty significant process in place, like the one at NanoCon that we've talked about, or American Atheists. I think they have one, probably AHA, probably most of the big conventions now have them all. And you pulled up a American Atheist, so that there's a process in place now, creating that safer space. Is it perfect? Well, I mean, we can always improve, and I think we try and do that every convention where we go back and we have a postmortem about what we talked, what happened, what occurred, how can we be better, what can we do differently, what can we do to improve it. So it's organic. It never stops. If we have to change the wording, like you offered some things that AA has that Nanocon doesn't have, we'll look at that in the future and see if we want to add that to the space. How we do an investigation, who's involved, what we can and can't do. Some of those things are not going to change, but some of them can. So we're always going to question ourselves, at least in the ones I'm involved in or continue to be involved in. Can we get better? Can we do a better job? Always. We want to challenge ourselves to do a better job. The bottom line is we want to do a better job so that the people that come and visit us feel that they can have a good time and be safe while they're having a good time. That was the whole purpose of these things. Okay. And I want to go back to something I said earlier. Nobody's protecting organizations to if something happens that somebody's going to wind up throwing an investigation in to protect an organization. We're protecting the people that attend. That is, at least in every one I worked in, that is the sole focus of this, to make sure that people have a good time. And the organization protects itself by putting this process in place that works so that we can wind up creating that safe space. That's the
Right.
best thing an organization can do, and protect the people that come so that they can wind up having a good time. Okay?
and and you are that middle person that is between the organization and the people attending. You're not taking any sides. You're that neutral.
I'm always neutral. Now, full disclosure, I'm going to be sitting on the board of probably of Nanocon again. So if I wind up going back, which I'll probably do, and I do the investigations just so that it's out there, and do the training or stay involved, I'm on the board. But I can tell you, our whole opportunity, and one of the reasons I'm going, we want to create a safe space to have a good time for the people that are coming. I may wind up bowing out of the investigative process because I'm going to sit on the board again, and bring somebody else in to wind up doing that so that there's not the appearance of conflict. Okay.
Right, right.
But in all the organizations I ever worked in, intentionally, I never sat on a board. I was never part of the organization in any way. And if for some reason there was never anybody who could point a finger and said that I had a conflict in anything other than being a neutral arbiter of doing investigations. So that was always the point. It was always the perspective to listen to what folks had said who felt that the community needed to wind up being a safer space. And I think they did a great job. I think that, people heard them. Some people may have come kicking and screaming, and being dragged by the toe, but we're there in terms of being hundreds, magnitudes better than we were 10 or 15 years ago. But we can always get better. And that's why I said with this new organization that's come up now, the content creator organization, that's an offshoot of this. I think that helps. And I'm not affiliated with them. I know I plug them, but I don't have any kind of fiduciary, thing with them other than I've talked to their executive director a couple times, and I like the things they're doing, and I like the things she had to say about their organization, and I think they're a great step forward. So I wish them every success.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I think between the community asking questions, the organizers setting up processes that help with incident reporting, with safety, and with having all of these also outside organizations like the Creators Accountability Network, to where content creators themselves, who are generally speakers at these conferences, can have that extra step of training and sort of making sure that they can report bad behavior as well. All of that together is what makes the community safer. Is you can't just have one thing and expect that one thing to make everything safer. It's a community effort, and we are all trying to do our part in that. So thank you so much, Eliott, for the conversation. Do you have anything else that you wanted to add? Anything we forgot to mention or that you wanted to? Okay, I really, really appreciate your time. This has been a great conversation, and I hope that is educational for people. I want to end by saying that this that this conversation is not meant to scare people away from the community. It's actually the opposite. The purpose of this video and these conversations is to help people understand that we want this to be a safer space. And most people who attend these events come from religious or controlling backgrounds, and they're seeking autonomy, they're seeking connection. And I hope that if you are someone who has attended these events or who wants to attend these events for the first time, that this will help ease your mind. And if you're an organizer, I hope that this will help give you a better idea as to how to help us build a stronger, safer, secular community together. Thank you, everybody, and I'll see you next time.
Thanks, AJ. Great chat. Thank you.